Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. The Quran 24:31 is one of the main verses that is used when we discuss women's dress in Islam. Some people say that it requires the covering of one's face. We'll be looking at that now, especially in relation to this series by Abdel Halim Abu Shuqqah, in which he speaks about women's face covering. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
First of all, really excited to be continuing this series on Abdel Halim Abu Shuqqah's, thinking on women's emancipation during the Prophet's lifetime, Dr. Shabir, and especially to talk about the niqab or the face covering, because some women wear the face covering today, and they point to a particular verse in the Quran. Abdul Halim Abu Shuqqah actually says, no, this verse doesn't say that women are supposed to cover their faces. So I think it's worth exploring. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what the verse says to begin with.
Yeah. So you will recall that in the previous episode, we dealt with Surah 33, verse number 59. So that's another major verse that is drawn into this discussion, and especially used by those who argue that the niqab is a necessity. But we've already dealt with that and shown Abu Shuqqah's exegesis of that, showing that it does not require. It's not a proof positive that women have to wear the niqab. And for someone to say that something is a requirement, they have to show that there is a clear positive indication about it. Like there should be a simple, clear, direct command for someone to start with. And if it's not a simple, clear, direct command, it should be something close to that. Now, in the case of that verse and in the case of the present verse as well, no, there's nothing so clear. So let's look at the present verse in a little bit more detail. It's in, as you mentioned, Surah 24, verse number 31. It reads in Arabic, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا. And tell the believing women that they are to lower their gazes and or turn away from looking at something undesirable. And they are not to expose of their zina. Now, I keep the word zina here, which some translate as beauty, some translate as ornament, some translate as charm. But let's keep it as zina so we don't tilt the scale in favor of one judgment or another on what the verse actually means and what it means for the face cover. They are not to display of their zina, except that which ordinarily appears thereof. Now, I say except that which ordinarily appears, that requires a lot of interpretation to go into it. Because illa ma dhahara minha is simply what the verse says, which literally means except what appears of it. So one might say what ordinarily appears, what appears according to custom, what appears according to decency, which means that there is already like a supposition of a local context of what people already consider to be normal. Anyway, we continue keeping the word zina at the moment. And just to not sound too cryptic about this, I mentioned some possibilities, right? Charm, beauty, ornaments, and so on. So why this variation? Because zina in Arabic just simply means, decoration or beauty. It could mean both ways. And in the context of this verse, if it means the woman's innate beauty, then that would mean she's to cover all of her beauty, including her face. So some would want to steer it in that direction. But if it means external items of beautification, such as makeup, such as jewelry, and so on, then that would have a different flavor altogether. It wouldn't necessarily mean that the woman has to cover her face. Now,
so a lot hinges on that one word, zina,
hinges
right?
on that, yes. Again, not to be too cryptic, if I just move on to the last part of this verse, it says, وَلَا يَضْرِبْنَ بِأَرْجُلِهِنَّ لِيُعْلَمَ مَا يُخْفِينَ مِنْ زِينَتِهِنَّ. And let them not stamp their feet so as to make known that which of their zina is hidden. Now, this latter part is widely explained by classical commentators of the Quran to mean that women at the time used to wear an anklet which jingles. So the women are being told, don't stamp your feet so that the anklet will jingle and thus turn heads, right? Draw attention to yourself, unnecessary and an unwanted kind of attention. So if you think about the contrast, the beginning of the verse is talking about Zina, this last verse part of the verse talking about Zina, it's a long verse. Then you see there is a kind of mirroring effect, right? The last part mirrors the first part. In the first part, there was that Zina that is apparent, illa ma dhahara minha, except that which appears thereof. And then the last part says, your Zina, that which is hidden. Right? That which is apparent, that which is hidden. So obviously we're talking about the same concept of Zina. And since in the latter part, it's clearly a reference to the ornament that a woman wears around her ankle, then naturally in the first part, Zina already also refers to ornament rather than, the woman's innate beauty. But this is where the difference of opinion occurred as to, those who say that the Zina refers to the innate beauty, they would want to insist on the face as well being covered, and those who say it's the ornaments, for which there is a very strong argument, as I just demonstrated, they would say, well, the face is not required to be covered. But there's more in the verse to be expounded, and I want to open it up.
Please
for
go ahead. Yes, yeah. Dr. Shabir, because Abu Shuqqah clearly is standing on the side of saying that no, the face covering is not required based on this verse.
Yes.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Sure. So to continue, where we left off, where the verse says they are not to expose of their Zina except that which ordinarily appears. It continues now in Arabic. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ, and let them draw a portion of their head covers.
Oh, yes, I forgot this part of the verse.
Yeah,
over their bosoms or chests or something like
chests.
This, yes.
Now, the Arabic word is juyub, which is a plural for jaib, which means opening. And another Abdel Halim, the Cambridge scholar, translator of the Quran, translated that portion as the neckline. So let them draw the head coverings over the neckline so as not to وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ إِلَّا لِبُعُولَتِهِنَّ, and so on. So that they should cover that neckline and not reveal of their zina except to their husbands, and then other persons or categories of individuals are mentioned, mainly men to whom they can never get married by virtue of their close relationship by blood. There's some others like servants who are there, and you have no fear that they would harm the women. Boys who are still in their age of innocence with regards to women's private matters. Other women, of course, especially those from within the community, and so on, like men who have no desire for women. So you get a sense then that there is a gradation, and there are different levels now of exposure. So you might say that if you take the view that we're not talking about the innate beauty, we're talking about the ornaments, then there are those aspects of ornament which are like, let's say, a nose ring, because the face is normally to be left exposed. The nose ring would be exposed to all and sundry as well. That's not an issue. But if we think about the necklace, especially one that hangs low, then the Quran is saying, okay, even though in society at the time it was common for women to expose their chests, and of course by extension the necklace, now they are to draw the ends of their head covers over the necklace so that part of that ornament will not be visible. So that's what is to be hidden. But of course, you can see the close connection between the ornament and the place where the ornament is, right?
Yes.
So this is it is mainly the place where, because regardless of whether one is wearing the ornament or not, that place would be more attractive and needs to be covered in a decent society that the Islamic ethos is concerned with at this moment. So because of the different opinions that are there in the classical commentaries, you have this bifurcation among Muslims where some are insisting that the face doesn't need to be covered, and some are saying, oh, the face needs to be covered, because some are relying on one opinion, some are relying on the other opinion, both which go back to companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Okay.
In
So
one
even
case,
at the time of or at the very earliest of times, there seemed to be this controversy over how women should cover, and whether the Quran supported that then.
Yeah, what we can say is that, going back to the earliest written tafsirs of the Quran, the commentaries, we have these opinions being attributed to earlier authorities, namely, in this case, companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Okay.
However, Abu Shuqqah has gone through and reported on 13 major commentaries on the Quran, spanning from the third, people who lived in the 3rd century, like Tabari, all the way to our contemporary times, people who lived very recent in our most recent century. Big names like Tabari we mentioned, Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, and so on. They all, after reporting on all of these various opinions, they all concluded that the woman's face does not need to be covered. That this verse is not requiring women to cover their faces. It's only that interpretation of Masud who said that the Zina refers to the outer clothing. So they're to cover all of the Zina except what normally appears thereof is the outer clothing. That's part of the Zina as well, the decoration, the beautification of the woman. And that is the one aspect of the beautification which she's allowed to show, which means that she's not allowed to show anything, right? Ibn Abbas, on the other hand, companion of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his cousin, said that the face is excluded. That means the woman can also expose her face. Now, it's interesting to note that even those who say that a woman should cover her face, there's a longer discussion, and we can go on and on about this, but they have to come to exceptions to the rule because they recognize that there's some difficulty with regards to this, and so they say, okay, in the case of difficulty, like she doesn't have to, it's not. So they're recognizing that there is a difference between a woman exposing her face and exposing some other part of her body, especially some intimate part, right? There has to be a gradation. You cannot say the whole thing is all in one category. And then it comes to prayer. And somehow, as Abu Shuqqah points out, it became a standard understanding among classical scholars that while in prayer, a woman should not cover her face and her hands as well. Probably it's because these are to be prostrated with upon the ground. And so, if you have a part of your garment, like you're wearing gloves, for example, your palms are not touching the ground, your face is not touching the ground if you have a face mask on. Now, scholars have had to make the exception for the, during the COVID times, and we were all wearing masks. So that was a question, would that interrupt your, or interfere with the validity of your prostration? And the answer is no, you're doing that for a necessity, right? But it was a standard understanding that women do not cover their faces while they are praying. And so people had to deal with that. Even if they said that the woman is required to cover her face at other times, they said, okay, not during the prayer. So why this difference is? And some who want to maintain that woman has to cover her face, they try to say, well, you have two different standards, one for when you are in prayer and one for when you're not in prayer. And then they cite the case of the man. One man is required, according to classical scholars, only to cover the area from between the navel to his knee. When we talk about what is called aura, the Arabic word, without doing that, his prayer would not be valid. But at the same time, they say that he should cover his shoulders as well. Not because it's part of the aura, but that would be the natural, the decent, not decent is not the word, but the appropriate attire for prayer. You're not going there bare shoulders. Okay, so they say two different standards for the men, but what they're missing here is that what is required in the prayer is actually more than what is required outside of the prayer. In other words, if a man is working in a field and he covered only from his navel to the knee, no one can accuse him of indecency. But when he goes to prayer, he should put something on his shoulder as well.
So for a man, more is required, but for a woman, less is required if we follow this verse and understand it to be that the woman should cover her face.
That's right.
So this is all very confusing, Dr. Shabir. You can see how for the average person, they're reading this verse and thinking about the different interpretations and just getting lost. Yeah.
Well, to conclude, there are I stand with Abu Shuqqah in saying that it's very simple. If you're reading the verse and you don't have a preconceived notion that the woman is supposed to cover her face, there's no way you're going to get that from the verse itself, right? The verse itself says, let them draw their head covers over their bosoms. It says nothing about face, and to bring it over the face, and this is most unnatural. Like, who's going to do that? Who's going to you tell somebody, use a part of your garment to cover your chest, and they're going to understand that, okay, I should bring it over my face.
And this is the main verse that is being used to justify the covering of one's face, right? And
Surah 33, verse 59, but we dealt with that, and now we've seen this one also does not support the idea of covering the face. And so there's nothing in the Quran, in conclusion, we can state this firmly, nothing in the Quran says that a woman is supposed to cover her face.
All right, thank you for that, Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.